Welcome to Just Another Podcast. I'm Justin Soderberg, your host. This is episode 10. We've gone through the first 9 episodes. We're just getting started here at Just Another Podcast, but I thought I'd do a solo episode today, so there's no guests. It's just me, sadly, even though I don't like to talk, right? But I just want to talk about the guests we've had so far and give you an idea of what's coming up in the future with different episodes that are going to be planned, and then how this format's going to really work also about seasons, because it's season 1 technically, and see how things lay out. I don't have guests lined up obviously for the rest of the year. I do it week to week or every couple of weeks, so this is not like this is who's going to be on for the next couple of months, but more along the lines of what you can expect from Just Another Podcast and myself and Brian and some other news also. So I wanted to do a little recap of what we've done and who we've talked to and what topics we've brought up. And then we'll go into the future. I'll talk a couple other subjects today just to do, something to talk about, something to have fun with. And then we'll just wrap it up. It'll be a quick episode, I'm guessing. Shouldn't last too long unless I like to talk. I am drinking a little Orono Brewing Company beer right now, so maybe I'll talk a little bit more than I normally do. So we kicked off Just Another Podcast in the middle of this quarantine COVID situation. So I've been wanting to do it for a long time. I registered the domain name, like some people know, and I decided that I wanted to do a podcast, and this was the time to do it. I could do it via Zoom, I could do it via the internet, I could do it in person, but this is the way to do it now during COVID. I don't need to talk to anybody in person. I don't need to be within 6 feet of someone. I could do it over the internet and get this done. So I tried a couple of things. There were a couple of questionable episodes, audio wise and video wise, but now we've seemed like we've got a groove going. And I upgraded my audio equipment during the time, new mixer. So we're working on it. In the future, I would like to do all of these podcasts in person. I would like to do it with me talking across from each other. I think you get a better experience, a better conversation, and I can manage all audio and video in-house. So look for that in the future when we actually can sit in a room together. But right now, we're going to continue doing it over the internet. And I hope you guys have enjoyed it so far. Thank you very much for listening. Episode 1, we brought in my buddy Josh Moulton from Queen City Cinema Club in Bangor on Main Street in downtown. We talked a little bit about his business and how it got started and what he's doing now during COVID and upgrades and so on. I talked to him. We opened Orono Brewing Company in Orono this past week. I talked to him. He stopped in there with his wife, Tiffany, and we talked a little bit about what he's planning and so on. He has no set opening date still to give anybody who listened to that episode an update. But he is planning and moving forward with trying to get back open at some point. He's just in no rush. We all are experiencing different things during this COVID situation, and he's just living his life and taking it day by day and hoping that this all opens up and becomes more user friendly in the near future. But for right now, he's been just relaxing with his wife and trying to figure out things with his kids and his family and just figuring out what's going to be next. So I really appreciated Josh coming on and kicking off all of this. He was a great guest, and he'll be a great guest in the future again. Let me take a quick sip of beer. That's one thing I guess I don't get to do when I'm talking by myself is drink beer in the gaps when the guest is talking. And episode 2 was a special birthday episode with my dad. We talked a little bit about who I am and where I came from. That was fun. Thanks, Dad, for coming on. I'm sure you guys will all be excited. There will be an announcement towards the end of the 2020 year with my dad. He's going to be joining us at least once a year for a special episode, so stay tuned for that. We're still working on the details of that, but it'd be kind of fun. It's going to be an annual tradition, hopefully, with my dad. Episode 3, we brought on Jay Cochran of Forecastle Tattoo and the Bangor Comic and Toy Con. Two of those things are passions of mine. I like tattoos. Jay's a tattoo artist. He's my tattoo artist. I also am a huge comic book fan, as anybody watching this video can see. Behind me is my comics and so on. Jay talked about how he got into tattooing. He talked a little bit about how he got into the con. I joined them on their live broadcast on the Bangor Comic Con and Comic and Toy Con Facebook page. I'll be joining again at some point in the future, I'm sure. But it was just a fun conversation with a friend of mine. We go way back, and we learned a bit more about tattoos, my tattoos that he's given me, and just other comic book things. Episode 4, we brought on Brian Keyser from Unrest Coffee. Brian would then turn out to be an actual guest regular on this podcast, becoming a co-host with myself. We've only done 1 or 2 episodes now, actually 2 episodes with the two of us together. We were going to have one this week, but I just decided with the holiday it might be best just to do one solo. So Brian will be on again in another 2 weeks. We'll talk other things. The past 2 ones were focused on basketball mainly, but we'll get into other subjects. Maybe we'll go back into talking a little bit about coffee. We're going to look a little bit more about current events. The problem with current events is we're trying to stay away from political and sad things, and right now that's all that's happening. So, political, social justice issues are big in this world right now, and we all should be taking care of each other. Excuse me, and focusing on those. But we're going to try to focus on the lighthearted and more fun things and things that we're passionate about. So in the future, you'll see that. Just right now, excuse me. We'll be talking other things in the near future. He just gave him the week off so that he can spend time with his family for the 4th of July. Episode 5, we brought on a good friend of mine, John Cassidy of Last Ditch Racing, talked a little rally racing in New England and the world, really. That was a fun episode. John's a rally car racer for Last Ditch Racing. He also owns the company. But this year's rallies in Maine and New Hampshire have been postponed until next year. So we'll talk again probably next year, closer to the rallies, about those ones. It was a fun, long podcast. There was a lot of fun talking racing with him. Episode 6 was the first episode that Brian joined us as a separate episode. You can look forward to those coming further in the future. Adam Morissette, coworker of mine and industry worker of mine, joined us for episode 7. He's from Dirigo Draft Services. He founded that company to clean draft lines. Great episode if you like beer, because that was a big beer episode. We talked a lot about draft line cleaning, so if you don't like that, skip that episode. But it was a fun time to get him on there. I've been working with him closely for the past couple of weeks as we opened OBC. So that's been nice to see him again in the flesh. Episode 8 was another podcast about basketball with Brian. Episode 9, I brought on Ben Bishop. He's a comic book creator from the Westbrook, Portland area. Talked about his start and getting into comic books and in Kevin Eastman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Aggregate and Drawing Blood and all the different projects he's involved in. That was the longest episode we did, but it was a passion of mine. So I'm pretty excited that we were able to talk about comic books and the world of comics and creating comics. So I really appreciate that. If you missed that episode, it was last week's episode. Please go back and join it and listen to that one. That one is fun. If you're into comic books, that's a great one to listen to. You can also visit Ben this year at the October Comic Con, Bangor Comic and Toy Con, October 2nd to the 4th, and meet Ben, get his autograph, buy a book from him. I really support Ben and what he's been doing, and I really look forward to talking to him again for sure. So that's what we've been doing. I wrapped it up really quickly, but that's what we've been doing so far. The guests have joined me so far. I have a couple lined up already for the next couple of weeks, and we're hoping to finish season 1 on October, 12th, recorded on the 10th, release it on the 12th. That will be the week between I get married and when I go on my first honeymoon. And I'll explain that in a second. So season 1 will be from when we launched episode 1 up until episode, let's see, 11, 12, 13, 14, probably episode 15, right around there, will be the end of season 1. The reason I'm doing seasons is because I will need a break in between podcasts, and I want it to be kind of a cool, and if someone wants to join us again in a podcast in the future, they were on season 1, but maybe they'll join us for season 2. So season 2 will then kick off on August 26th will be the release of that podcast. That will give me some time off in between to enjoy my first honeymoon with my now fiance, then wife, Taylor, and gives us a little time to reboot and try another season's worth of podcasts. So I'll explain a little bit about what we're doing in the future here in a second after another sip of beer. Okay. So next week, I will be joined by Jillian, or better known on the Instagrams as @Lady in the Tri-Clamp. She is a worker. She works for, She works for Oscar Blues Brewing Company in North Carolina. It's their East Coast affiliate or East Coast branch of their brewery from the West Coast. They make some delicious beer. I drank many Oscar Blues Brewing Company beers, but Jillian has become a friend over the years with Orono Brewing Company. She's been friends with Asa, the ownership at OBC, and she just appreciates our beer at OBC. So she's come up to our brewery and visited multiple times. We've gotten to know her. She's a great person in the brewing industry. She also adds a lot of uh, fun to the brewing industry, if in that sense. She's a female in the brewing industry, which is a very small number of people in the brewing industry that are female. So it's kind of cool to get her perspective next week on the brewing industry as a whole, brewing beer, working at a brewery the size of Oscar Blues. It's a massive brewery. Also, she is someone who has over 15,000 Instagram followers as a female in the brewing industry. So we'll talk a lot about both the brewing industry and Instagram next week when she joins me. She works 7:30 p.m. till 5:30 in the morning. So she'll be joining us prior to her shift on to record. So just we'll give her a little bit of a break because it's almost like me waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do a podcast. So we'll give her a break on that. But she'll join us. She's a little nervous because she doesn't do podcasts and video that often. But I think she'll do great. We'll learn a little bit about Oscar Blues and we'll learn a little bit about being an Instagram beer person. And hopefully she has some OBC stuff to wear because she's a fan of OBC. So that'll be next week. The next week after that will be Brian again joining me, and then there'll be another 2 episodes after that with guests as well, and an episode with Brian in between there. We're hoping to get Spencer Wood from Tip Whip. He's a entrepreneur who I've become friends with over the past couple of years with Orono Brewing Company. Tip Whip is a ride-sharing program or app, I should say, like Uber or Lyft, but college students run it or drive the cars, and college students also are the riders. So for college students, by college students kind of thing. So we're looking forward to talking to Spencer. He was supposed to join me a couple of weeks back, but our schedules couldn't match up. So we'll get him on before the end of the season. And then I just confirmed the last podcast of the season to wrap up this first season of Just Another Podcast will be a friend of mine and my comic book dealer, Paul Eaton of Galactic Comics in Bangor, Comics and Collectibles. He's on Hammond Street in Bangor. He's who I buy most of my comics through now, as well as become a good friend of mine and of the Comic Con that he'll be selling things at. So we're pretty excited to have Paul on, and that will be the last episode of the season. We'll talk how he got started with Galactic Comics and what the store is like, as well as talking pop culture, comic books, Pokemon, pop vinyls, all those kind of things. So if you're a nerd in the comic book industry like myself, then you'll enjoy that episode to finish off the season. Season 2, we'll talk about that in a second here. Season 2 will start August 26th, like I said. I'm having another sip of beer. So season 2 will feature a bunch of new guests. I have them all laid out. I have got to reach out to a bunch of them to see if they'll join me. But I'd like to get people from Bangor, in the Bangor area, people of all kinds of different subjects. So it's not just the same thing over and over again, but with people filtered in there that are huge passions of mine. So there may be comic book people, or there may be beer people, or there may be whatever people that I would be interested in talking to because that gets me happy. And this is my podcast. So we're excited for that to happen. September, October, November. Season 2 will last up until right around Christmas. So we'll get a number of guests in there. We're hoping also that we'll kick off season 2 on August 26th. Brian Keyser will join me again as the co-host, but we're also thinking that it likely will be Josh Moulton as well. We'll do a 3-way hostful podcast, and we'll just talk current events and things. Josh is a good friend of mine. We wanted to do something together for a while as well, so I just thought of bringing him in on the hostful episodes. So Josh Moulton, who from Queen City Cinema Club season 1, episode 1 of this podcast, will also join us now in those every other week, hopefully, podcasts featuring just the hosts. So I'm excited to get Josh on here coming up here in the future. If anybody has any like questions, or anybody has any recommendations, or anybody themselves wants to join the podcast, just get a hold of us. We are, I think, at contact@justanotherpodcast.com, or justin@justanotherpodcast.com. Send us an email and let us know that, maybe you want to join and talk to me about something. If you're trying to promote something, if you got something coming out that you've created, or you're doing or organizing an event, or whatever. Honestly, it can be a 20-minute episode. It could be a 2-hour episode. Get in touch with me, because I'd love to talk to as many people as possible. I think that we should have some fun and talk about some random different things. And maybe I wouldn't think about certain people or certain things. So just get a hold of me. We'll chat. We'll talk. We'll make it happen. So I have a pretty open schedule for September, October, November. I have a couple of people in some key places that I want to talk to because of key dates. Obviously, Comic-Con is in October, so I'd like to get Jay and Will on to talk about Comic-Con. So there are some things there are dates that I want specifically to talk to certain people. But yeah, get a hold of me. We'll talk. Facebook Messenger, anything any way you can get a hold of me, we'll chat. Podcast. So that's a little bit of a gist about the podcast and what we're doing in the future and the past and so on. Let's thank you for everybody who's been able to join me on this podcast. Thank you to everybody who's listened, subscribed, liked the photos, shared it. It's just been a really cool thing to have you guys A, be guests, and B, be a listener. I really appreciated the number of listens that are out there. It's a lot higher than I thought there would be. I just wanted to do this personally, selfishly for myself, and it's actually worked out pretty cool. So I'm excited to see what the future is like, and I'm excited to see where this goes and who I get to talk to and who I get to meet. I think it's going to be kind of cool to see this grow. We're going to hopefully, I talked to Josh Moulton from Queen City Cinema Club. We're hopefully going to move in as much as I like doing this at my own house, in my own studio, quote unquote. I think we're going to move it eventually to Josh Moulton's place. It's Queen City Cinema Club in downtown Bangor. So we'll be able to have a nice studio-ish space that we can use, that we can meet with people. Maybe it's still guests from far away have to join us via Zoom and other things, but I think it's going to be kind of cool to see what the future is like and see what we can do as a podcast. I don't want to just do this by myself. So if Brian and Josh or anybody wants to join us for those guest podcasts as well, they're always invited. So look forward to the future. Can't wait to see. Thanks for listening. Now, one quick second to break to have another drink. Anybody who's listened before, I might be rambling. I can't tell how fast I'm talking or how many words I'm speaking. I appreciate you all again for listening. So, what I wanted to also do on this podcast is I have written some blog posts of my own for my own website, justinsoderberg.com. Not that I'm trying to promote that website, because it's just there I own the URL just because it's my name. But one of the things I talked about on that blog is some comic books that I've liked over the years, or comic books that I'm reading currently. These are things that I would recommend. So some of this might be brought up again in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, when I talk to Paul from Galactic. But I think that if anybody's a comic book fan out there, like I am, and you're thinking about what I should buy, or maybe you're trying to get back into comics, this will be a segment of this episode. Sorry for those people who don't want to listen about comics. You can turn it off now. I'll wrap it up after that. But for right now, I want to talk a little bit about comic books. So, excuse me. So, first comic book that I'll recommend reading right now is a comic book called Star Wars. If anybody's heard about it, this is the current ongoing series that's put out by Marvel and Star Wars and LucasArts. This comic book is the current ongoing straight ahead Star Wars series. This one is written by Charles Soule. So Taylor, my fiance, is a huge Charles Soule fan. Charles Soule writes a lot of post-apocalyptic type series. I'm kind of getting into trying to read those novels of his, but I'm a comic book fan right now, so I'm reading comic books. So the Star Wars, this is just a great way. He's a great writer. I'm really impressed with the artwork in this series, but I'm also mainly impressed by the actual writing and the storyline in this. It's pretty cool because anybody who's a Star Wars fan knows that there's only 9 conical films and then a couple of offshoots. So if you're like tired of watching the movies or don't want to watch the movies anymore, reading comic books is a fun way to get around that. So this is a great series. You can get them. There's about maybe up to 6 or 7. I don't know off the top of my head right now of these. I've read them all. They're great. Um, check out your local comic book store for Star Wars by Charles Sewell. Um, we'll talk about more current comic books. The other one that is definitely worth reading, anybody out there, is The Immortal Hulk. It's a new Hulk series that came out. We're on issue 34 that just came out this past week or the week prior. Immortal Hulk is a Hulk that can't die. So he's tried to shoot himself and do a couple other ways to kill himself. And the second he falls asleep, the Immortal Hulk comes alive and saves him. So that's the gist of it. There's a lot of other things, but this writing in this is amazing. Ewing is the writer for this series right now. It's unbelievable. These comic book covers, a lot of them are done by Alex Ross, who's one of the best comic book cover artists of all time, in my opinion. He paints a lot of these. So Immortal Hulk. So I will tell you, it's hard to see. Let me see if I can grab it. No, it's too far up. Where is it? Oh, it's down here. It's Immortal Hulk #1 is going to be hard to find. We got it. Hold on. Yeah, this is Immortal Hulk. This is #3, 2. I mean, #1 is hard to find, but #2 is even harder to find. This is the first appearance. This is a first appearance. It's the first appearance of Dr. Fry. This comic book shelf, brand new when I bought it, was $3.99, which is what the going rate for most comic books are. This one right now is worth right about $100 for a 9.4 rated comic book. So they're not easy to find. So this is a comic book that if you want to, I'm going to give you a little bit of a pitch. I'm always about local comic book stores. In Bangor, if you're from the Bangor area, you've got Galactic Comic Books and Collectibles on Hammond Street, and you get Top Shelf Comics and Collectibles downtown Bangor. Go there, buy your comics, buy whatever you can get. They're small businesses that serve our business as well. However, those comic books are hard to come about. So I will give you the pitch that for $9.99 a month, or it's like, I don't know, $69 a year or something like that, Marvel Unlimited is perfect. You can use it on your iPad, you can use it on your computer, or whatever you want to use it on your phone, and you can read an unlimited number of comic books that they have available on there. Usually, how it is that like episode or comic book 34 came out today or this week. I mean, in about 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month, this will be out on the unlimited thing. So it's a little bit further behind, but because there's 34 issues of this one, if you were to sign up today and read a couple every couple of nights or whatever, it would be a little while before 34 is out. So then you'd also be able to catch up. So Marvel Unlimited is definitely worth it, but buy physical copies if you can to support local businesses. That was a new cherry pie, fruit pie. Okay, so continuing on with comic books. Another series that I recommend reading is The Undiscovered Country. Weirdly, co-written by Charles Sewell. Again, another post-apocalyptic type thing. I mentioned Star Wars. He also writes this for Image comic books. Image has a couple of my favorite comic books to read on it. I really honestly only read basically Image, Marvel, and then I read TMNT or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from IDW. But I also read obviously some split decision comics I'll mention in a second from Ben Bishop. But Undiscovered Country, about a United States that was walled off, and you have to read it to understand it. But it's an amazing comic book. Right now, I believe we're up to issue 6 with the COVID delay in shipping. Issue 6 just came out a couple weeks ago, but definitely worth reading. This definitely a comic book that I recommend over and over and over again. We're talking current series right now. The Immortal Hulk, Star Wars, Undiscovered Country are all current series that are going on. Another one is one of my favorite comic books of all time, Spawn. It is the world's record-breaking, longest-running self-published, or not self-published, independent-owned comic book title, Spawn. Episode or issue number 307 came out recently. Definitely, a fun comic book. They made a movie years ago, but it's not that great. They're hopefully making a new one coming out pretty soon with Jamie Foxx. Um, he died and then sold his soul basically to come back to be with his wife. But he gets some special powers. He also is hideous under this mask. He is a hideous person. So she doesn't even recognize him, and so on and so forth. This comic book is one of comic book that I read when I was a kid, and this is still the same series. So you're at 307 um, number on this thing. So it's still the world record breaking, longest running, independent owned comic book of all time. This is number 307. It broke that record with number 301, just so you know. So you can continue to get those. Those comic books, it's a little bit easier to find the older ones. There's ones in the middle that are a little harder to find because the print runs weren't as much because Todd McFarlane was the author and creator of this and artist of this. He took a little break from drawing the covers and so on, and those ones are harder to find because no one really wanted them. Todd McFarlane is a pioneer in this comic book industry. He's one of my favorite comic book artists of all time. I will tell you, I love these comic books and I love Todd McFarlane. He is not the greatest author of all time, so it's a little bit difficult to get into at the very beginning. But Spawn is one of the best characters I think that's ever been created, and he created him years ago, 307 issues ago. Okay, moving on. So the next one would be anybody who's heard of The Walking Dead will know the name Robert Kirkman. Robert Kirkman created The Walking Dead for Image comic books many years ago. He also ended it in 2019. Robert Kirkman then created The Walking Dead for AMC, the TV show, with a producer director Scott M. Gimple. In the middle of that time, he opted to create a comic book called Die, Die, Die. That is also a great comic book because it's written by two people who have created a great TV show. Die, Die, Die took a while to get issue 8, 9, and 10 out. Issue 10 just came out a couple of weeks ago, again on Image comic books. Unbelievable, gory, it's mature rated, but a fun comic book. It's one of my favorite comic books that doesn't revolve around a superhero. So you think, or superhero, supervillain. So you think like undiscovered countries like that. You get your Star Wars, but there's I can kind of consider those people superheroes. But this is basically non-superhero. So if you like that, Die, Die, Die. Robert Kirkman. Excuse me, Image comic books. Okay, we're gonna also throw in a comic book that you can get. Kevin Eastman, who created Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, created this comic book along with I forget how to say his name, David Avalone, and Ben Bishop. It's called Drawing Blood. You can get it at Kevin Eastman's website right now. You can also get it at other places as well in the graphic novel version. But this is the issue version. There's 4 issues. Kevin Eastman. It's a false story about a true story about Kevin Eastman, how he created, along with Laird, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Great comic book, illustrations and art, cover art and illustrated. Most of the illustrations and inside is done by Ben Bishop from Maine. Again, great comic book. They did a Kickstarter for it, so there are other versions out there, but I have the comic book version. It is a great comic book to read, and it's only 4 issues. So if you want something quick and easy, Drawing Blood. Okay, we're gonna finish off with one of my favorite comic books of all time, and then we'll have 2 more though. So we talked to Ben last week about The Aggregate. Ben Bishop, this is his first split decision comic book. It's the world's first split decision comic book. So in the comic book, you get to a certain page, it will tell you to pick a certain page to go to. We mentioned it last week. So on the bottom, it says go to page 86 or whatever. that is where you go to continue the story. So he mentioned that there's over 100 ways to read this comic book. So in a sense, this is 100 different books in one book. It's a great story. He worked very hard on it. I think it's great. I think his artwork is unbelievable. He does tell stories in a way that it almost was like if you're interested in movies, he tells stories that like when you read this comic book, it's almost like watching a movie that's not moving. He has a great. He would be a great producer, director of a film. I really hope at some point the aggregate gets picked up for a TV show. I think it would be unbelievable as a TV show, and I hope he gets to work closely with it because he'd be great at it. Ben Bishop's The Aggregate. You can get that on his website. This is one of the first printings of it, but you can get the second printings online now in multiple covers. Bishart.net. You can get his graphic novel version of it also at Comic Con, October 2nd to the 4th in Bangor at the Bangor um, uh, Arena. What's it called? The insurance arena. How's it called? The arena downtown. This is, so aggregate, unbelievable. Again, more post-apocalyptic if you're into that kind of thing. Less superhero, obviously, but the aggregate's great. Ben Bishop, if you want to know more about Ben Bishop and how he started Split Decision Comics and how he got into the industry, listen to last week's episode 9 of Just Another Podcast. Great episode, so listen to that. Okay, we're almost done here. We can listen here. So, I am a huge The Walking Dead fan. Part of me is the writing. Part of me is the art. Part of it's just the idea to think about what would happen if the world ended and you had to fight to survive, and you had to fight to survive for your family, for your loved ones. But also think about some sort of villain that's not just a villain; it's a monster in zombies, or the TV show calls them walkers. The Walking Dead is one of the greatest comic books I've ever read. It is probably up there, tied with with other things like Actually, no, it's up there. It's the best comic book that I've ever read that doesn't include a superhero. I think Robert Kirkman created a quote unquote monster with this series. He is the Seinfeld of comic books in my sense. He writes this comic book, gets to a point. This is issue number 193. He was 7 issues away from issue 200, and he killed it. This is it. Last issue right here of The Walking Dead. It's a thick issue. He just decided that he's done. He was done, and he was moving on. So, to me, The Walking Dead. So I'll give you a synopsis of The Walking Dead. So The Walking Dead and the comic book. So I'm going to go comic book version. Is you don't know how the zombie apocalypse started, but it's happened. You don't know the middle. So in the beginning, the comic book starts off with Rick and his partner. They're both cops, Shane, who are getting shot at by a villain. They're trying to get at. Rick gets shot. Then it goes on, and it fast forwards to the point where Rick is in a hospital, and he wakes up from a coma, and the zombie apocalypse has happened. He's walking to the hospital. He's weird, dead inside here. Da, da, da. And then he ends up going on to try to find his family and so on. He goes to his house, meets some people that were around near his house, who tell him that the city is pretty much overrun and so on. So he goes to see where his wife could have been, which is near Atlanta. Atlanta is overrun with zombies. So he moves on. He eventually stumbles upon his wife, and the story continues from there. It's about survival. It's about saving your family and trying to be around your family, but also having this thing that's like there's just quote unquote, I would say animals, which are the zombies. But it's so good that I've read it through once and through twice, all in the 193 issues. I'm now to the point where I'm reading it again at night. I have it on my iPad and I'm reading every issue. I think I'm on issue 15 right now. I've also watched the season on the TV show. They created a TV show for AMC multiple times. It's still going on with this COVID situation. We've had to pause the season finale and yada, 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 or mid-season finale. Oh, season finale. But so it's one of the greatest comic books I've ever read. I think it's amazing. The covers are in color, but the rest of the comic book is in black and white. Originally, I want to say that was for cost savings, probably. I don't know for sure. But I will tell you right now, it brings to the point where if the world was ending and the world was collapsing and the government collapsed and people were out on their own, it would be a dark and dreary day. Even if the sun's shining, you'd still feel like it was dark and dreary. To me, reading it in black and white gives me that aspect of the world is ending and this is it. And that the comic book brings the point where to you that it's black and white. So I almost wish they made the TV show black and white. That would have been cool. But again, worth reading. It is not easy to find the digital copies. Issue 1 goes for thousands of dollars of the physical copies. So Comixology, it's an Amazon company. I know people might complain about that. Comixology is a great. Amazon purchased it. It's a digital version of everything. You can buy episode. I think issue 1 might be free if you subscribe, and they have a free trial. But you can buy all the digital copies of these on there for pretty cheap. So if you want to just to read it and figure out the first couple of issues, you can also go out and buy the graphic novels. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, reach out to Paul at Galactic. If you're from Bangor, reach out to Paul at Galactic Comics. He'll be able to make an order for you, or you can get them online. But I would support local and buy the graphic novel version of it. There's volumes, there's compendiums, there's all kinds of things. Even if you watch the TV show, read the comic book. It's well written. There are some different things from the TV show. Daryl is on the TV show, doesn't exist in the comic books. Rick is actually the one that drives the motorcycle at one point, not Daryl. So if you've seen the TV show, but you haven't read the comics, I highly, highly recommend it. I've been trying to get Taylor to read it for a while. I believe she's read a couple issues to start off with, and she's read some of the spin-off things that some other authors have written. But Walking Dead to me will always be one of my favorite comic books of all time. I was pretty sad the day that I finished reading issue 193 and said it was it. That was it. It was done. This is the only episode, the issue left for The Walking Dead. Fast forward until a couple of weeks ago. I was looking online for what comic books are coming out because Diamond, the distributor for a lot of comic book companies, was closed due to COVID. I'm searching on Midtown Comics, which is a place that if I'm not going to be able to find things, back issues or so on with Galactic Comics or Top Shelf Comics in Bangor, I'll order from Midtown Comics because Midtown Comics is a place that's in New York City. So it's still a small, independently owned comic book store, but they ship pretty well to you. I've bought thousands of comics from them. Negan lives. So Negan is he's up there. So Negan and you see the Infinity Gauntlet right here on my arm, and Thanos are my two favorite villains in comic book history. Negan is a guy who runs the Saviors in Walking Dead. Negan is one of those characters you love to hate and you hate to love. He's the guy that is always causing issues, and he's excuse my language, he's a dick. But he's a character that you don't want to die or don't want to disappear because he's so good. He's just amazing. So in the TV show, they kicked ass with his character and so on and so forth. He's been in the comic book. He's still obviously in the comic book, but Negan Lives is a one-off comic book, supposedly. Don't know if it's going to finish any further than this. That was released last week that I have not got a chance to read. However, I cannot wait. It's going to be happening tonight. So maybe I'll do a separate episode on how Negan Lives was. But Robert Kirkman and the guys from Image Comic Books and Skybound opted to create this comic book. Cannot wait. So The Walking Dead continues in a sense to me. It's been over a year since they released issue 193, and I cannot wait to read that. So I recommend supporting your local comic book shop. Galactic Comics in Bangor is owned by a dude who works full-time. Paul works full-time at another spot and then comes at night and opens his comic book shop from 5 to 9 Wednesday through Saturday and sells you comic books because he enjoys comic books, enjoys Pokemon, pop culture, pop vinyls. Excuse me. He just loves doing it. So support him. If you order more than 4 or 5 comic books a week from him, he'll give you a discount because that's how he works. So the other place to get things, if you're looking for a lot of extreme back issues, Top Shelf Comics in Bangor, Jeff over there, great dude. I've been buying comics from him for a couple of years now. He has a extreme back catalog, and a lot of it's on his website, tcomics.com. That's where you would find that. Read comic books. I'm going to get a little personal here. Let me have a drink first. When I was younger, I mentioned this last week on the Ben Bishop podcast. When I was younger, I had a hard time reading. And I'm having a hard time talking. I had a hard time reading. So the only thing that really got me through that was comic books. I could read beginning to end, word bubbles, great. Put a book in front of me, I'd get frustrated and annoyed, and I would put it down. So yes, I have learned to read books. Yes, I listen to a lot of audiobooks now. But back in the day, comic books were the only thing I could read. When I was sick, Dad, I have a stomach ache or whatever, my dad would bring me, or my mom would bring me ginger ale, comic book to get over this illness. Comic books mean a lot to me. I am an artist, graphic artist for digital graphic artist. I draw a little bit. I do that for a living on top of being the GM for Orno Brewing Company. I draw. I am a graphic artist. So arts obviously means a lot to me as well. However, the writing in some of these comic books are some of the best writing I've ever read in my life. There is a reason why I continue to read comic books, not just because they're easy, not just because there's pictures, but because these artists deserve it, because they work very hard to create a medium that is for every age. You're talking, yes, is The Walking Dead or Negan Lives more of a mature rated comic books? Yes. But there's other comic books that are for kids. Brian, my co-host every other week, his son Jude is getting into comic books. I gave him a little bit of recommendation. I'm going to drop off some comic books next week. It's for everybody. I'm 34 years old and I still read comic books. I have thousands of comic books in my house. Some of these comic books behind me right here is my retirement, in a sense, because they're all worth some money. I support the comic book industry, and you should too. Local comic book dealers like Paul and Jeff over at Top Shelf, and then Galactics for Paul, need your support as well because they're a small business and these are not cheap to buy anymore. So that's my pitch for comic books. I recommend them. They're easy to read. They're easy to get because we do have a couple now comic book shops in the area, as well as there's some in Waterville and other places in Maine. But also because I read them on my iPad right here. So digital comic books on Marvel Unlimited, it's easy to read and they're on your iPad. You don't have to buy them. They're free with a purchase of regular subscription. Okay, I was reading Star Wars, the old Star Wars, not the old one, but the early 2000, or I would say early 2015 Star Wars, Carnage. Do it because comic books are worth it. That's my pitch for comic books. That's my top reading comic books, places to get and stuff like that. I'll do another episode in the future. Marvel's my go-to. Marvel's the company I read the most. Right now it's kind of questionable with their distribution and what's going on with them, so I don't know what the heck's going on. But, support your local comic book store. Support the Ben Bishops of the world, the people who are working hard to create their own. I think Taylor and I are actually going to create our own graphic novel here coming up pretty soon. We'll release information about that in the near future. It's a fun medium to get involved in. It's easy because you can read one issue in about 10 minutes and move on to the next thing. Everybody in the world has 10 minutes to spare to read a comic book. It's well worth it. Again, I'm a nerd for it, so I have kind of a personal reason why I like it. But that's my pitch for comic books. So finishing up here, so I don't talk forever and I don't get, maybe too sauced with these Orno Brewing Company beers. I mentioned earlier to set my first honeymoon. So season 1 will end August 12th. That's when the last episode for season 1 will come out. That's with Paul Eaton of Galactic Comic Books and Collectibles. I then get married. I'm getting married on August 8th to Taylor Bemis. We're going to get married here in Maine. We're pretty excited. Nervous, but excited. It's getting pretty close there. Now we're in under 5 weeks now. You can follow Taylor and I's journey through this kind of stuff at Married Into This on most things, most social media. You can also, we have a podcast, and we're going to be doing a new episode pretty soon. Then we'll take and go to our day jobs for 4 or 5 days, and then go on our first honeymoon. It was supposed to be to Arizona, because the Arizona people are being idiots right now, and their COVID cases are spiking. So we're not going to Arizona. We're going to Sugarloaf in Carrabassett Valley in Maine. So I'll be on my first honeymoon for a week in August. We'll come back. I'll record an episode. We'll release it on the 26th. And then we'll be back for the entire fall in the beginning part of the winter. We will then take a break for the holiday because of Christmas. And then in January, we'll actually take our actual supposed honeymoon, hopefully to Arizona, if not somewhere else. And then we'll be back for season 3. So I appreciate everyone who's listening right now still. Anybody who's listened for the first 9 episodes, now into 10 episodes. We really appreciate it. I don't make any money off of this. I actually lose money off of this. I like talking, and I appreciate every single bit of support. Because I don't make any money off this. I really appreciate any shares, subscriptions, likes, anything you can do for the Just Another podcast. It's a passion of mine. If I can further this anymore, it'd be unbelievable. So thank you again. I'm Justin Soderberg. This is Just Another Podcast, justanotherpodcast.com. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Stitcher, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, on and on and on and on. The best way to find those links is justanotherpodcast.com. All of our links are on the top page or on the side page of every post for every podcast. There is another Just Another Podcast. I was first. I'm Justin Soderberg. Thank you again for listening. I really hope you guys tune in next week when we welcome Jillian from Oscar Blues Brewing Company. Thank you again. Have a good night.